Oh, that was so good. That was so good, but with spoilers right now. But with that ending, and I understand why they did it, but I hate speculative endings. I want to know what happens. I want to know finality. I want to know what happens to them a month down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. What happens before the Soviet Union collapses? What happens to all of them? What happens to all the characters? What happens to Paige? What happens to all the Jennings? What happens to Stan? What happens to Stan's girlfriend? So, it was probably the best. The whole series was wonderful. But this episode was probably the best one out of all of them. It was just the most tension, the most suspense. There were a couple episodes this season that, especially in the beginning, it didn't feel like it was getting anywhere. Like I needed to move faster, but But this episode, it all came together. And I want to know what happens to Oleg too. You know, I guess you can. I mean, and even the creators of the show, they're like, well, we don't know. It's up for all of you to decide. But it's like sometimes I just want to know. I just want the finality of it. But and I think I read one of the reviews by the New York Times that says, well, the rest is fan fiction. But so what stood out, there were a couple of scenes that stood out in this finale, but the one that stood out the most was that garage scene with Stan and the Jennings. That mental standoff. It wasn't, Stan had a gun drawn on them just, to display his power, and he planned to arrest them. But it was psychological reasonings that got the Jennings out of that. Now, I don't know if there was a real life Stan, would he have given in to the Jennings? I think maybe he was more wedded to the FBI as opposed to to the FBI as opposed to, was the FBI or CIA? No, FBI, as opposed to his loyalties to his friends and especially to Henry. But I could see why and how he went that way. But what happens to Stan down the line? What happens if someone finds out what he did and pieces everything together, even though he knew beforehand? So, like, had Stan found them, or if someone else found the Jennings would have been captured and they would have been tried. So that scene was just so intense because you didn't know which way it was going to go, and that's what I love about good movies and TV is the unpredictability of it, and which is why I'm gonna digress to Star Wars for a second, because I have friends who are mad at The Last Jedi because it wasn't the Star Wars they wanted. They wanted certain characters to be a certain way and do a certain thing. And my argument to that is, well, why have it so predictable? You want to be excited by the spontaneity of the show. I mean, you also want it to make sense. You don't want things to get turned on their head just to do it and just to have a twist. But with this, you didn't know. You didn't, and that not knowing is what made it so great. The show's use of the music, With or Without You, a song that I already really like by U2, it makes me like the song more because the way it was used in that scene when they were taking the train to Canada, well, obviously we knew that Philip and Elizabeth were getting out because the passport checked out, but I thought when the train was going to go away from the platform that we were going to see Paige in custody of the Border Patrol. So I'm like, oh my God, Paige is going to get caught. What are they going to do? But then you saw that Paige left them. So, but like, it makes me wonder, what are these kids going to do? Because Paige can't go. Can Paige go back to Stan? Maybe. Yeah, but then what's the FBI going to think if Paige goes back? So that would raise more questions. So it's like, I mean, I know Paige is a really smart kid, But what is she going to do? I mean, Henry is safe at least with Stan. That's good. But man, what is Paige going to do? And I want to see what happens, like present day America. What happens to the Jennings in present day? That would be so cool if there's a show that just flashes forward, because it's so weird. I always think of this when I watch shows. But the Jennings were my parents' age back in 1980 in the 1980s. My parents were around that age, so the Jennings would be my parents' age now. So it makes me wonder. And with all the changes that has been going on with Russia since the Americans have ended, it makes you wonder what would happen to him. So I guess we would, try to speculate by looking at, the real life Jennings and see where they go and what they do. But we don't know. So in that case, the finale was a letdown, but everything else about it was just so good. It made me it left me wanting more. There are some series that the endings, resolve everything, and it's like, okay, cool, resolution, great. And some that are like, oh, but I'm still, I'm still very, very, very positive about it. But damn, I just wanted to know. I was hoping of a flash forward. I was hoping this season maybe would go to the actual year that the Soviet Union collapses. I think it's another 2 or 3 years until the USSR does collapse. I would have loved to have seen that. But I guess we won't. But then again, maybe we will. Who knows? But overall, such a great series. Some things that stood out to me in the series. I guess it paints the gray area of things. How what one side thinks of another, and then the fact that, as an American, I'm rooting for Philip and Elizabeth because, I like these characters, and it's like, I'm thinking, I hope Stan sure doesn't capture them, but at the same time, it's like, wait a minute, the Russians are the bad guys, and why wouldn't Stan want to capture them? They want to hurt our country, and then there were instances where the Russians were on the right side of history when Russia fought against apartheid. And there were some episodes where Philip and Elizabeth were on the anti-apartheid side, apartheid side, of the coin. So in that case, they were right, but there were other cases where they were very wrong. So it just goes back and forth in gray areas in both sides, and then you get to like Philip and Elizabeth and their point of view. Elizabeth, she was always a hard ass, but she just got tougher and tougher and tougher, while Philip became more sensitive and more withdrawn. But then you also liked Stan, his just dedication to his work. I think before he moved next door to the Jennings, he was like undercover for 6 years infiltrating the KKK. So this guy was a hardcore agent. So you got to know him and where his loyalties lied, and you got to know him personally, his strengths, his weaknesses, and you got to like him. I got to like Stan. I got to like the Jennings, even though they both did things that I would disagree with. I would imagine the Jennings more so. Not imagine, the Jennings more so. I guess if you look at, good and evil, right and wrong, the Jennings definitely did more wrong. I don't think Stan killed innocent people for his country. The Jennings definitely did. They definitely did. So if I had to pick a side, I would go with Beeman, only because of the truly evil things the Jennings had to do, even though they didn't want to. They had to, so they themselves wouldn't get caught and blow the whole operation. But my heart went out to Oleg, because here was a guy trying to do the right thing, and he always throughout the series, just by the skin of his teeth, escaped something, and then he finally got caught. So, and then one scene stood out to me a couple of seasons ago where a couple of times they'll allude to what's going on now. So the Soviet Union went to a war in and it was a proxy war, not a proxy war, but I guess kind of a proxy war. The Americans helped out the Mujahideen, who the Soviets were fighting against, and the Mujahideen ended up to become Al-Qaeda. But so the Soviets invaded Afghanistan and fought them, but it showed that, wow, what a needless war this was. At the same time, America is now in Afghanistan fighting a war there. So you got from the Russians' point of view back in the 80s, but it's a shared point of view with, I would think, a majority of Americans who, I think most of us don't think we should be in Afghanistan. So we got to experience their point of view just 30 years in the past. So that was a big deal, and you witnessed Oleg's brother being killed in Afghanistan. So there was that, how history repeats itself, but with different countries. And then on a lighter note, I remember there was a scene where Henry was walking around with a really ancient portable video game system, where I think it might have been a football game or like a Space Invaders game, where the graphics were just dots. I played these games, I was, in the mid 80s, I was around 10 years old. So, maybe a little younger than Henry, but like I played these games where you would just go, dee, dee, dee. This was the sound of it. Dee, 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 dee. And there were little dots, and I was just like enthralled by these games. And there was a scene where it showed Henry walking around with that the way we walk around with our phones now. So I like how they have those little nods to those kind of things. So overall, just a great series, a great episode. Like I said, I want more, and I want to know what happens to them now. Make a sequel that takes place now, and I want to know everything that happened up until now. That is my request. And so thank you, Americans, for such a great show. And thank you for listening to this review. So I am Mike Lane. This is the Music, Movies, and More podcast, and this was TV. So the original title, I think, of this podcast was something like Music, Movies, TV, and More, but it didn't roll off the tongue. Then it was Music, Movies, and Other Stuff, but then the acronym of it was MOUS, so I didn't want to be named after a terrible Chinese dictator. So it was Music, Movies, and More, so which is ma'am, which I can deal with that. Yes, ma'am. There you go. I am polite. But so anyway, yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Mike Lane Act. That's MikeLaneAct. You can email me at MikeLaneAct@yahoo.com. Find me on Facebook at Mike Lane Actor. And please share, rate, review, everything about this podcast, and help spread the word. All right, so until next time, bye.